the Sugar and Spikes podcast, a show for everyone trying to navigate business and life without losing their minds. I'm Dez, a coach and consultant who is entirely overeducated, habitually overdressed, and obnoxiously honest.
And I'm Tammy. I'm a psychologist. Was I supposed to say more?
You know what? Enough said. We talk about mindset, mental health, and making it all work in the big, bad business world.
One quick note. We may be mental health professionals, but we're not your mental health professionals.
So, enjoy the show! Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Sugar and Spikes podcast. I'm not
Now you're not saying it. You're like, I'm not going to say it.
How else do you lead into a podcast?
I don't know. I thought we were going to try not doing that, and then we didn't. And then we did it last time, but not the time before. And now we just look awkwardly at each other and you don't say anything.
I haven't learned the art of the segue.
You guys know who we are, right?
Kind of a big deal. The funny thing is my last name's so awkward. I really just go by like Des W.
Yeah.
Unless it's like I'm talking to a lawyer or something. Oh, but the really funny thing is I've been flying a lot, and the flight attendants always try to use my last name. Like when they bring me my drink or something, they're like, "Here you go, Ms. I'm like, it's fine, give me my drink."
I experienced similar things.
Mm-hmm. The perils that can sometimes, if we don't have a strong identity, lead to shitty confidence even.
Totally.
That's a really bad segue. Actually, so last week we talked about
That's our growth edge.
Noted. Last week we talked about feedback, right?
Yep.
And feedback is good, bad, all the above.
Difficult, constructive.
Hard. The one thing that came up, and we wanted to dive into it a little bit more, is around what happens when you are getting consistent criticism, consistent
setbacks. Even if you're not getting criticism, but like things are just really tough.
When things don't go well, or if maybe flip side, things are going really well and you end up in a position where you're like, holy shit, how'd I get here?
Yeah. And you feel like an imposter.
Imposter syndrome, like just really lacking like the confidence. And I feel like there could even be a difference between imposter syndrome and just not having the confidence.
Oh, sure.
Like I think even in terms of speaking up like during meetings and everything, maybe sure you're supposed to be there, but do you just have like the natural confidence to speak your mind?
Share your thoughts and ideas.
Share your thoughts and stuff. So confidence is hard, and it's one of those things that definitely ebbs and flows.
Oh, for sure.
Even based on like how your jeans fit that morning. Like it can be as simple as that, right?
It can, and hopefully those are minor and you have an internal sense of confidence and being self-assured. And it doesn't come easy to a lot of people, but like what I would hope is that you can build that and that little things don't completely throw it off.
Yeah.
It's not as fragile, a little more robust.
Yeah, I think that confidence it's really one of those kind of mental muscles that you need to focus on and kind of actively not build up to like build it up, but like to keep working at in order to maintain. Right? Like it's kind of like
it's not just like, oh, I have confidence, and then like it's a process, right?
And it's like running. Like if you run for a bit, you can do a 5K and you're fine, but if you break a leg, then you're not, and then you can't do it, and then you have to build it back up. Just like if something happens to where it like bruises your ego, your confidence is going to be knocked down.
Yeah.
So I think having we wanted to make sure we gave you guys like some action tools and things to be able to continuously kind of bend and flex the confidence muscle.
Yeah. Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think sometimes, we just need a boost. Can really be helpful. And I think one of the things that can help you identify that time is when you're just hearing that negative voice in your head all the time, right? Like, you're not good at this, you're not good at that, you can't do this, why are you, right? Like, you're hearing that negative chatter, which I think we've talked about before. I know we've talked about before. I don't even know why I'm saying I think. I know we have. But you want to recognize when that's happening and kind of figure out a way to turn it off.
Yeah. And I have 2 favorite ways to kind of shut that shit down.
Okay.
The first is make a list of all the things that you know you're capable of and good at, and like all the like the highlight reel, right? Like the good things you can point to. The second option, and this one's kind of my top favorite, is text your person and tell them that you need a cheerleader. And just let them keep going until you can't deny it, right? Like, because, and you've done this, you text positive things, and then I'm like, yeah, but that's because of X, Y, and Z, and then like you keep sending me things.
Yeah.
And then eventually I'm just like, fine.
Fine. I'll be positive. Fine. I have good qualities.
I'm independent. I'm completely needy.
As am I. But we digress.
Yes.
So I think another thing too is to recognize that even if you aren't able to do something, it doesn't mean that you'll never be able to do it. So maybe you're not in that position yet, but it doesn't mean you're not going to ever get there.
Right.
So not to frame it, right? Because we talk a lot about not thinking black and white. And I think this is part of that. Oh,
Yeah.
I can't do it is very black and white. Like, I can't do it yet, but here are some steps that will, and here are some steps that will help me get there. That implies a little more flexibility.
Yeah.
Somewhere in the between those can't and can, right? Because you're somewhere on that road. And so recognizing how to move yourself along the path.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those things of like, instead of being like, I'm never going to have that job title, or I'm never going to sign like that 6-figure client, make that 6-figure sale that I want, shifting it to, there's a really good chance it's not going to happen in the next couple weeks, months, year. What are some things? How can I take those steps to bridge the gap to where it could become more feasible?
Right.
Right? Like, I don't know. I think,
what are they looking for that I'm not providing?
Yeah.
How can I make my stuff more appealing to the type of clients that I'm looking for?
Yeah.
That kind of thing. So growth, right?
Yeah. 100%.
And then, so some other ways to kind of build confidence: celebrate when you do a good job, when you achieve a milestone. Like, don't be like, oh, this wasn't the milestone I was hoping for. Like, be like, yeah, fucking milestone.
Any win is a good win. Oh my God. I've been working on something lately where it's gotten to the point where if nothing is, and I've had like the same kind of mantra. I've experienced these situations in every type of job I've had, where if I end a week where no one's lost a limb, no one's bleeding, and nothing has burned down, be it like literally or figuratively, it is a good week.
You just drop the mic and walk out.
Like, nothing else matters. And there have been times where even maybe something's like smoldering in the corner and you're like, hasn't caught fire yet, I'm out.
Or maybe you got like your whole to-do list done for the week.
Yeah.
Right? Or maybe you got that one thing that's been on your to-do list forever done.
Yeah.
So like, celebrate your accomplishments and see value in them.
Yeah.
Right? I think people who have less than stellar confidence at times can kind of explain away their achievements. Kind of like when you ask me for like the positive stuff and I start the positive stuff and you're like, yeah, it's because of this, it's because of this. I'm like, don't explain it away.
Yeah.
Fucking own it, right?
Mhm.
So like sometimes we have to remind ourselves to do that.
Mhm.
And so it's okay,
Yeah.
right? Because even just celebrate, like, you don't have to go have a fucking party, but
Mhm.
even just being like, you know what? I'm really proud of myself.
Mhm.
I got that thing off my to do list. It's been there for like 3 weeks. I finally got it done.
Mhm.
High five me, move on to the next
Mhm.
thing, right? It can be small. It doesn't
Yeah.
have to be like party balloons and
Yeah.
rainbows and cake, but like take
Yeah.
pride in it.
And if recognizing your wins and hearing from other people, like, the positive stuff, like, if you've reached out to someone or if you've kind of gotten to that point where all the positive thinking in the world isn't going to help you feel confident for whatever's going on, then that's kind of the time to consider processing. You know, don't dwell in it, but if someone has been texting you for the last 30 minutes of all the things you're good at and
And
it's
you're just
still
like,
not
no,
going
no,
anywhere,
no, no.
then start like I mean, Tammy's a therapist, so she initiates it, but she's like, "Okay, but what's really going on?"
Yeah.
And like talk about the doubts and like the uncertainty and really where is this coming from?
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, even if you can't like fix it because it's really hard to fix that type of stuff because so often like lack of confidence and anxiety and nerves around like performance and stuff are about something in the future, so you can't really control it. But like if you can pinpoint it, then pinpointing like kind of the root can help you feel so much better because so often the root is not as big as we think it is.
Right?
You know?
Yeah. That's a
Um
really good point.
Thank you. I'm here all day.
It's
But
true. It might, like, if you ask me for positives and you're just explaining it all away, it probably is something else.
mhm.
Like, what do you need?
Yeah.
What do you need from me right now? What's going on?
Really like
Let's talk about it.
yeah, and the thing is and there were these kids in undergrad and I love the way that they kind of did it around like midterms and finals and shit. I'd always walk by them and I'd pick up on they were all angsty and brewing in it
Yeah.
for about 5 minutes, and there were so many times over the course of the year where I'd hear, like, one of them be like, "Okay, 5 minutes, we're done,"
Yep.
and
Swim in
move
it for a
on.
few minutes.
Yeah. And, I mean,
So
there's
setting
reason.
time limits, there's
Yeah.
something to that. I
Mhm.
completely agree. Like feel it, feel it. We've talked about that before.
Mhm.
Like feel your anxiety
Yeah.
for but
90
set
seconds,
time
a few
and then
minutes.
move on.
Yeah. Like, and I mean, the research, I haven't looked into the research for anxiety or nervousness, but I know for anger, it's like 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Anything, like, I mean,
It's
yeah.
flexible. You don't want to do it so long,
Mhm.
right? So it's kind of a judgment call.
Mhm.
You can
It
start it
depends.
depends as everything does.
Mhm.
um and so you can kind of set your own limits,
Mhm.
right? Like
I mean, feeling
start small and go up.
yeah, like, if it's too big that you can't push it away, like, I think about it in terms of, like, a giant block, right?
Mhm.
And if, like, you mentally visualize, like, you pushing, like, a block away, if it's too big to push it away, then spend a few minutes, tear it down, like, chisel at it, feel it, and then start taking those pieces away.
Yeah.
You know, like
It's so smart. You're
so
on it today.
yes.
Yeah, you are.
It's these early morning episodes.
We got extra sleep from the time change.
Totally. So one thing is let's say either as an entrepreneur. Well, let's take the entrepreneur card.
Okay.
Let's play that.
Okay.
Let's play that one out, and if business stuff comes up, then hooray. Um, but say your confidence has been eaten at for a while, like things haven't gone great, and there's just been this consistent set of things haven't gone well, you haven't made the sales, you just feel completely beaten down.
Mm-hmm.
That shifts, right? Like, it doesn't become a matter of confidence. Like, it can really eat away at your confidence, but then I think there's almost like a layer thing that goes on, right? Where, like, your confidence gets eroded, and then it starts to kind of get into your push and, like, resilience around stuff, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I
It
think
becomes more permanent.
yeah,
Yeah.
it stops being, like, muscle atrophy and starts, like, eating at, like, internal organs,
Right.
essentially, of your
Yeah.
business.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that that's something that is rarely not rarely talked about, but isn't really acknowledged, right? And I know we've talked about it a bit, like, it takes 3 to 5 years for a business to really start showing profits and things like that, and we've all referenced it, but what really understanding what that actually looks like, because 3 years doesn't sound like a long time, but 9 months in, a year in, 2 years in, it's a long time.
It's a long time, and in the beginning, it's kinda like I talk about it as like, I compare it to parenting all the time.
Mhm.
Ignorance is bliss, man.
Yeah.
You don't know.
Yeah.
Like, you're just like, "Oh, we're gonna start a business."
Yeah.
And then a year in, you're like, "Oh my god. This is so much harder than I thought." And it's
Mhm.
still magical in some ways,
Yeah.
right? There's still magic about it. And it's just difficult in ways you never could have
Mhm.
anticipated. It's all like it's a bit of like learn by doing.
Yeah.
So, and parenting is like that. Like
Mhm.
you have a very rosy view of it because you babysat your niece a bunch of
Yeah.
times and it was great. And then, your kids are screaming at you for
Mhm.
like the 100th time that day. And that's just something you have to learn to deal with by
Mhm.
doing.
Well, I think and I never thought about it quite this way, but I 100% had that experience because when we started our business, I was like, I've worked in startups. I know what startup life is like. Shh. Oh,
This is what it's like.
oh, younger me. So precious, so naive. Like, because the thing is if you have worked with any company that is not your own that has brought you on, I don't care how small of a startup you're with, they've gone through the pain to be able to afford to bring someone else on.
Well, yeah, and the
Like,
owner may be going through the pain that you
yeah,
don't see,
exactly.
right? Because
Yeah.
like I think the struggle the struggle with
Mhm.
businesses,
Is real.
it's inevitable. The struggle is real, yes. But it's inevitable,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
The struggle for clients, the setbacks, things that are challenging, things you didn't anticipate.
Mhm.
It's inevitable.
Yeah.
And we have no idea the level it might get to. Like
Mhm.
we may think, oh yeah, there'll be some setbacks, but being in the middle of a setback can be incredibly exhausting
Mhm.
and painful and very challenging to your confidence.
Mhm.
So, like you talked about resilience. Well, the other thing I want to talk about is that those are the times for growth. But
Mhm.
growth doesn't happen when things are calm and running great and
Mhm.
going well. I mean, it can, but more generally, it happens when things are difficult,
Mhm.
challenging, and you're in a situation that you're having to, like a tricky situation to navigate.
Mhm.
Those are our growth experiences and they
Mhm.
happen in painful times. So,
Yeah.
learning how to build resilience is really, really, really important.
Well, it's essential because the times that you've been beaten down and there's so much writing on stuff are really the times you need to show up and it's kind of one of those fake it till you make it. Like, you can't go to a sales pitch or you can't show up to a business, right? Like, say you're a small business selling I don't know, like a boutique or something, right?
Yeah.
Like, say you own a boutique. If your sales aren't great, you can't schlep on into your boutique just feeling like sorry for yourself and not like
In your sweats.
yeah, and not feeling confident in what you have. Like, that is when you step up,
Yeah.
put yourself together, and you make that sale.
Mhm.
Like, you sell that fancy leather jacket and act like it's just another day,
Yep.
Like
I mean,
yeah.
resilience is really about adapting in the
Mhm.
face of adversity,
Yeah.
right? And sometimes it's a process that happens over and over and over, but that over and over and over process also reduces your resiliency, which is why
Mhm.
we talk so much about self-care and
Mhm.
why we talk so much about like healthy mind, healthy body in
Mhm.
order to keep going in your business.
Yeah. And I think so I talk a bit about like the fact that I work out pretty often
Mhm.
and everything. And honestly, one of the biggest reasons I do that and kept it up like so over the last year, like one thing that happened in terms of like my workout scheme was I got borderline lazy and I was just doing like the most basic videos. But to a point where things would get kind of hard, my lazy brain would be like, we can't do anymore. I do a little bit more. And then like you leave feeling accomplished. Like that's one of the biggest reasons I work out. Like it's not for like vanity's sake. It's kind of for vanity's sake, but it's not all for vanity's sake.
It's more
But
complicated than that.
it's something that I have easily at my disposal where I can do something that shows myself I'm capable of.
Yeah, so going back to something that you're good
Mhm.
at
Yeah.
and doing that, but maybe and increasing the level that you're doing it to become more
Exactly.
expert.
Like having that reference point because when I get out of a good workout and it's been like intense and everything, okay, well if I've done that, I can like do some other stuff.
Like I can
You
push
know.
myself here, I can push myself in other
Exactly.
situations.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think like we talked about, no, I don't want to say that. So, like building resilience, you have to be able to think about the long term
Mhm.
versus the short term, and you have to be able to overlook like short term failure, short term. And we've even talked about like reframing failure as
Mhm.
opportunity,
Yeah.
as feedback from
Mhm.
the environment, whatever you want to
From the
say, from
market.
the market. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, from the market. And seeing it as an opportunity to change, adapt, revise,
Mhm.
rethink, rather than seeing it as a negative.
Mhm.
Um, so you don't want to get caught in temporary problems,
Right.
right? So you have to be willing to stick it out. And that means
Mhm.
keeping going even when things aren't going great.
Yeah. And I think the thing is one thing is
And in the smartest way, too.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like if we're using setbacks as feedback from the market, like start to track that and look for those trends. Like so much of life is about the trends. Like we talked about trends from like your business partner and feedback like last week and like market this week. If you pitch, if you're selling stuff, whatever setbacks you're hearing, if you're tracking those, you'll be able to see a pattern and then you can account for it
Yeah.
and shift
Yeah.
versus just like going through like the motions and making pitch after pitch and oh boy,
Like
it's
maybe
not
you find
happening.
that this kind of customer doesn't like
Mhm.
your stuff, but when you pitch to these
Mhm.
people, it works great. So
Yeah.
then maybe you shift your focus from
Mhm.
the ones that aren't as successful to the ones that are more successful
Mhm.
while you figure out how to target the ones that aren't successful,
Yeah.
right? Like a whole strategy around
Mhm.
that. But it's like being tenacious,
Yeah.
right?
Well, and I think of like I want to definitely like start incorporating like goods and stuff because I know there's so many entrepreneurs that like have physical stores that aren't necessarily service based. Like if we think about, I don't know if you've ever watched. It's a CNBC show called The Profit, and he
Mm.
works with like entrepreneurs and like saves their business and stuff.
Oh,
And they're like so often they profile people that are just getting in their own way. Like I'm thinking of this one like clothing production guy who was like, I make stuff like this because it's my art and all of these things. And it's like, yeah, but if you would just make it in these colors, like everybody's saying they want in this color, that color's done. There's a trend. People are asking for stuff. Do it so then you can like feel the other stuff,
oh,
you
that
know?
reminds me of that conversation we had with Joey,
Mhm.
who talked about like creatives kind of struggling in business sometimes
Mhm.
because um they are so focused on the art of it
Mhm.
that they neglect the business side of
Yeah.
it, right?
Mhm.
And so that it can be kind of a tough haul for creatives sometimes,
Mhm.
or like just getting something out there that isn't perfect,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Um, so, working within the time frames that you're given rather
Mhm.
than taking as long. And also, we had another conversation with somebody who talked about like um, getting something out there that isn't perfect and then refining along the way as soon as
Mhm.
you know that there's a market for it,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm. And I think in terms of keeping track of lessons learned and setbacks and everything, I think I think it's important to kinda get that on paper and, like, we're talking about true longevity, right? Like, a six-month review, things like that. And also, um, like, what the results and reasons were. Like, if you're doing pitches and stuff and if, like, things aren't closing, chances are, most of the time, people aren't just gonna be like, "No." They're gonna be like, "No, we don't have budget. No, we don't have time." Things like that. Track that.
Yeah.
Over 6 months, you're probably gonna see 20, "No, we don't have that type of budget." Like, things like that.
Yeah, I think that makes a really good point is kind of goes back to is it a fact or is it a feeling?
Mhm.
Like you don't want to be vague about these things. Like
Mhm.
if you didn't like don't just keep track of I didn't close this one, I didn't close this one. I
Mhm.
didn't close this one and here's why. I didn't close this one and here's what they said. I didn't
Mhm.
like just what you're saying, right? So then you can track those trends, but you
Mhm.
have to be specific.
Mhm.
Like we ask when we get constructive feedback, can you provide me examples?
Yeah.
The more information you keep track of, like
Mhm.
you don't have to be ridiculous about it, but the more specifics you can give, the
Mhm.
better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think even if they don't provide a reason, I mean, Noel talked about this in terms of interviewing, and
Mhm.
I could see how it would work um, in terms of like sell stuff. Okay, it sounds like now isn't the right time because of X, Y, and Z. Either should we reconnect in 6 months when like you have a new budget, or what like coming up with like a natural ish way to be like, what was the reason? Like, if they don't give anything, how what would have been more enticing?
Mm.
Things like that. Like
Yeah.
asking for some sort of
Feedback.
yeah.
Yeah. That can be challenging for sure.
Oh, totally.
You'd have to really work to develop
Mhm.
that.
Like, it's one of those things where, like, if there's an opportunity
Take it.
yeah,
Yeah.
and just don't shut down. Like, while the rejection is happening, it's your job to still be on point
Mhm.
versus, well, they said no and we're still on the phone and, like, just checking out. I don't know,
Yeah, I've
it's
done that for sure. Or
mhm.
I was like, okay, this is going nowhere.
Yeah.
So being in the moment with it, right?
Mhm.
And being present.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it's so cheesy, but I'm totally a fan of, like there's very rarely, like, a true no, and most of the time, it's just, like, a "not right now."
Mhm.
So you don't wanna shut stuff down.
Yeah.
You don't wanna unnecessarily burn bridges.
Yeah. I think I was reading this article where it talked about actually tracking obstacles, setbacks, and challenges
Mhm.
and like in a formal kind of spreadsheet. And
Mhm.
I think that's a really great idea.
Mhm.
Like what was it? Is it related to like
Mhm.
what you're making? Is it
Yeah.
related to sales? Is it related to delivery in some
Mhm.
way? And then like what were the consequences? And then like a small tracking the small specific lessons that
Mhm.
you're learning from each of these problems.
Yeah.
A concrete thing. And if you learned anything about the larger or like the bigger picture
Mhm.
in this way, and you track it over time, you make it like one of the metrics that you track.
Mhm.
I
I like
love
that.
that. It's
Mhm.
really good.
It makes it less personal
Yeah. It removes
because
the feelings from it.
yeah, and we
Mhm.
talk about this so often, but especially as an entrepreneur and stuff, you're so invested and rejection can feel like they're rejecting you and really they're just rejecting like your service or product. Like
Right.
it's
Doesn't mean
not about
you, Des.
you.
Yeah. Mhm.
Um, I just it's so difficult to separate that out, which is why, like, honestly, that's one big reason why I'm a huge fan of like defined working spaces and still, like, even as someone who works from home and stuff, like, I put on, like, work clothes most of the time, 3 out of 5 days of the week.
Most,
But,
nobody's
like,
100%.
because showing up, I'm business Des versus Des who's hanging out, you know, watching shitty TV. Like, two
Yeah.
kind of very different people.
Like it's a mindset shift.
Yes.
Yeah.
So having those defined parameters can help. And sometimes, like, sometimes when you're supposed to, like, as entrepreneurs, sometimes when you're supposed to, like, show up, you can't because you're sick and X, Y, and Z. And sometimes when you're, like, watching late night TV, you have the best idea. Cool. Go with that. I'm not saying it has to be, like, black and white rules because nothing in this podcast is ever black or white. But having some parameters around it can be so beneficial.
But you learned that. You tracked that. You told me that. You were like,
Mhm.
I feel more productive when I'm wearing work clothes and you
Mhm.
know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so you started doing that because it
Mhm.
connected more with your process. So it
Yeah.
was obviously, even if you weren't formally tracking it, it was something you were tracking over time and
Mhm.
you were able to look at it and be
Mhm.
like, hey, I feel more productive in these times rather than these times. What's the difference?
Mhm.
Oh, it's when I show up like made up, hair done, clothes on, like in a
Mhm.
defined space rather than wherever.
Mhm.
And so you made those changes and incorporated it. But that's a really good example of what we're
Mhm.
talking about
Mhm.
is tracking things over time
Yeah.
and what was the small lesson we learned and
Mhm.
what's the bigger lesson that we learned, right?
Yeah.
And then incorporating that somehow
Mhm.
as much as you can.
Yeah. Yeah. I think really when all is said and done, it's it's about taking the long view. It's about being reasonable in an area where most of the time there's no room for reason. Like, entrepreneurship is so unpredictable, so scary. It's this whole beast that, you know, you can never predict, but doing the best with what you have,
Yeah.
essentially, and managing it and having realistic expectations for an unrealistic situation.
Yeah. That makes a really good point, I think. Um and recognizing that like making decisions takes a lot of mental energy.
Mhm.
And so, like, focusing on the choices that matter the most in a
Mhm.
given day is going to be really important.
Mhm. And making things as easy as possible,
Right.
right? Like, just, you're building a business, you're building something that's so much bigger than you. D- It's sad. It's a lot easier said than done, but don't get lost in the nitty gritty. And
Mhm.
it's a death by a thousand cuts,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like, focus on what can have the most impact the quickest way.
Yeah. And recognize you're going to have multiple things going on. You
Mhm.
may have multiple fires to put out.
Mhm.
So maybe like focus in on one for the day
Mhm.
rather than all of them because if
Mhm.
you're spread across all of them,
Mhm.
then like you're going to wear yourself out much faster and
Mhm.
be more ineffective.
Yeah.
So, focusing on the one that's most pressing for that
Mhm.
day and devoting all your energy to it.
Mhm.
So, doing what you're doing, being present with it, and
Mhm.
reducing all of that, that death
Yeah.
by a thousand cuts, then you can take more effective
Yeah.
action.
Well, what I like to do is I like to have, like, 5 goals that I want to accomplish throughout the day.
Hmm.
Like, it doesn't matter when or how, but those, and then I check those off, and then I, like, end the day feeling productive. But I also have 3 key, like, big goals that I want done by the end of the week,
Okay.
right? So, like, say one end of the week goal would be having a podcast, like, queued for publication. So that's one thing. One of the other like, one goal on Monday would be come up with a topic. Sweet. Now that, like, one thing is done. So
Hmm.
chunking it,
Yeah.
right? And having that focus. And then when things go sideways, you can still say, well, that podcast wasn't queued by the day I wanted it up, but we got it out like 24 hours later.
And then tracking what got in the way that day, right? And I think that's a really good example, right? And like unexpected things come up, like we were going to record and then I got sick and lost my voice, but we were able to transition back to the one we had planned as soon as I was healthy.
Yeah.
So it wasn't wasted effort. And because you already had that set up, you were able to kind of plan and come up with another idea in the meantime. And then we had everything set up when I was healthy again.
And we also learned a lesson of always have backups.
Right? That's what we learned. Like, maybe we should be doing more than one per week.
Yeah.
Because things happen that you don't expect, like the flu.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I like that idea you have of like a certain number of things in a given day, but then overall goals for the week. And I like the idea that you do one thing at a time.
Yeah.
Because, you know, like multitasking has
We're
been,
not programmed to multitask.
it's not even like a real thing, but it's like this buzzword. I multitask. I'm good at multitasking, but really it's doing one thing at a time and focusing all your time and energy and finishing it and then focusing on the next thing. So you're not really, if you're multitasking, you're just, I feel like when I hear multitasking, but this is a really good example of people hear different things when they hear words. When I hear multitasking, I hear a lot of kind of random, purposeless confusion, right? Like I'm kind of doing this, but I'm kind of doing this too. And I'm kind of doing this over here. And I'm not really getting anything really done to my satisfaction, you know?
I mean, like, I've used that verbiage, but in a sense of I need to have lots of stuff going, but that's just like, that's a productivity style, right?
Yeah.
Like
you can have a lot of projects, but you're not consistently working on 4 of them at once.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You may
Exactly.
be doing like this for 2 hours and then this because there's a time frame, this for 4 hours or setting this aside, right? Like, so it's more organized.
Yeah.
And planned.
And I think really like the final piece is if your projects and stuff are feeling so overwhelming, if you just keep getting like beaten down and things aren't going quite right, it's really kind of one of those times to check in around, is this the right time? Is this the right piece? And like what was it that spurred the business, the company,
Like the big overall thing.
Yeah, what was it? Like everyone talks about knowing your why and everything. Sometimes your why shifts.
It does.
Sometimes the purpose changes, and really looking into, is this something I still want to press forward with?
Yeah. So re-examining your mission statement, your purpose, your why, whatever you want to call it. And if it has shifted, do you need to shift what you're doing? We've talked about that. People kind of going into entrepreneurship and realizing they didn't want to do it and exiting that space. And that was really the best thing for them.
Yeah.
And those who are like, absolutely no, I'm in it. This is for me. This is what I want to do. And being able to find strength in that to keep going.
Yeah. So
there you have it.
Yeah.
Resilience. Right?
Kind of important.
It is important. It is important. And remember, healthy minds, healthy bodies, good self-care will help with all of this.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we could start a whole other thing around making sure that you're still like taking care of yourself, and entrepreneurs like sacrificing everything. Yeah.
Well, we've touched on it before, so I'm just kind of gently reminding with love and compassion to take care of yourselves.
Because if you're not, as an entrepreneur, if you're not doing well, your business isn't doing well.
Yeah.
Like that's what it boils down to.
Or it'll catch up to you in the long term. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Well, we'll talk to you guys next week.
Bye, friends.